Hello everyone and welcome to week 6. I've got a lot to cover today because this is really our last week. I'll have a video next week, but it'll probably be pretty short because I don't have any readings or anything to introduce. But before we get into this week's discussion, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping matters. First off, if you didn't see my announcement on Blackboard, I need everything handed in by Friday of next week. Okay? So if you have any late thought papers or any late discussion board posts, make sure those are done by Friday of next week. If you want to turn in any more rough drafts, I need all of those by the end of the day, Tuesday next week. That'll give me a couple of days to read through them, give you comments, so that you can have everything done by Friday of next week. Special announcement, just for watchers of this video, your final wiki does not have to actually be turned in until Monday morning, June 30th by 9 a.m. You should be getting an email this week about class evaluations. Please fill that out and send it back. This is the first time I've taught the class, so I really appreciate your feedback. So on to this week's discussion into your thought papers. I combined my comments on the two because they were really related and similar. Our challenge this week was understanding how journalism adapts to this online world. And I thought you guys had some really interesting and keen insights about that. One of the first things that was a common theme in what you guys talked about was journalists' relationship with their audiences. And I think our first quote seizes on that pretty well. You can write 19 articles in a row that people enjoy, and you may not hear a word about it, but write one piece that people disagree with, and you're going to be up to your eyeballs in criticism. It's just one of the beautiful aspects of writing and reporting. I think that was true before the internet as well. As this author so eloquently puts it, but what the internet has done and how it's made it different is it's made that response so immediate and so quick and so easy for people to do. Just as the internet has made commenting really easy and hard to control, so has the internet made content online hard to control. The old New York Times saying was all the news that's fit to print. New technology has made it impossible for the media, not to mention one news outlet, to have the same level of control. This is a theme that comes up over and over again in our readings, but it's something I think that comes up over and over again, especially when talking with journalists, is because we have such a hard time giving up that control. But as another of you so eloquently pointed out, this is something that we need to give up. Broad participation is key for media outlets, and journalists must learn to see the world not through the traditional prism, but through the ideology of their consumers. So if we're understanding our consumers, and we're interacting with them, and we're creating these online communities, why are we doing it? One of you shared an example from his work that explains one reason and maybe one danger in pandering to the audience too much. When I moved over to Rant Sports, we were taught that one of the ways to create a following and heavily viewed articles was to create controversy through our content. One writer decided to write an article that said Claude Giroux was having a better season than Sidney Crosby. The good thing that came from the article was it received the most comments of any article published on the website in the past year, but it also ruined some of his credibility as a sports writer. This anecdote that you shared illustrates perfectly the delicate balance that we have to have as journalists. We need to create community, but we can't pander to this community. There also needs to be some rules for the interaction. As we talked about last week, the audience probably should be the one most responsible for setting the rules, but this week we explored really smartly what the journalist's role should be in that. If you are telling the audience up front that they need to be respectful online, then they at least know their expectations. So it seems fair for a site manager to remove the inappropriate content. I like this quote a lot because it illustrates how journalists can work with the audience by allowing them to have a sense of control, but setting the ground rules at the beginning so they know what's permitted and what's not. This idea of setting the rules goes back to the reading this week from Mark Doisa. First off, in his survey of online news outlets, he created his taxonomy, where he categorized in 2 dimensions. Was the main purpose of the site for editorial content or to create connection? Second, how moderated was the content? From heavily moderated to not moderated at all. And this creates a continuum that he illustrated in the article where most sites will fall. What I found interesting though is by the end of his survey of online news sites, he changed his taxonomy a bit. He kept the dimension on the continuum between focus on content and a focus on connection, but he changed the other one from moderation to what the journalism organization's culture was. The discussion of culture that he brings up is really important because culture determines a lot of how a news organization interacts. When I asked you guys in the discussion this week for examples of news sites that got it, a lot of you brought up ESPN. And I think a lot of it has to do with their culture. ESPN never operated and said, we're a TV station or we're a magazine. They said, we are a sports provider and we're going to provide that information in whatever context that we can. I have friends that work at ESPN and they say that idea has become a culture. It permeates the entire organization. When you're sent out to report a story, you're not told, write a magazine story or write a web story. You're told, write a story and own that story. Make sure we have more content and more information than anyone else. Contrast that with the culture of the New York Times, another site that you guys said is doing well. And I agree, but I wanted to bring your attention to a memo that was recently linked where the New York Times talked about its digital strategy. And in fact, the publisher complained that they were behind a lot of sites that he thought were doing it right. The very first step should be a deliberate push to abandon our current metaphors of choice, the wall and church and state, which project an enduring need for division. Increased collaboration done right does not present any threat to our values of journalistic independence. One other interesting point that you guys brought up in the discussion was website design and why so many website designs were influenced or looked like newspapers. Maybe newspapers would have a better chance online if they abandoned some of their old designs. I wanted to point out some of the work of one of the leading experts on usability, a guy named Steve Krug, where in his book he talks about how newspapers were actually always the starting point for web design. Web designers like the clean layouts. They like the efficient use of space. In fact, in an article about web design, the author praised newspapers for their clean design. Printed publications have been around for a very long time, so they have a great deal of experience. The greatest designs in the world are easy to understand, clear, and powerful at the same time. But just as the web has adapted, so do newspapers need to adapt how they present. If you think about what the New York Times did with snowfall, for example, that's a way to present information in a clear, concise, and powerful way, but to use the full conventions of the web. But in a concluding note, let's go back to your thought papers. There were a lot of really interesting quotes about journalists' role in the future of online journalism. One of the first quotes actually understands how adapting to the multimedia nature of the internet gives journalists power. The use of multimedia in online journalism adds a new dimension to content curation. In other words, the management of information. In this era, managing information outweighs getting information. So how do we find that best content? What's a journalist's role in doing that? In an online community, journalists can curate content by highlighting the best instead of deleting the worst. That goes back to our discussion on how to create communities. If you provide few rules and encourage participation rather than deleting things, I think you'll go farther at getting content. A lot of you also emphasize the need to create new roles for journalists. News organizations have to sort out ways to ensure the content provided is at the highest accuracy. Jobs like online community managers and online moderators can be used by news organizations to closely oversee the content submitted or produced by their audiences. How do we equate this, though, in a time when news organizations are cutting jobs over and over again? None of you really addressed that, and I think it's something that we need to think about. I don't think it minimizes the importance of those community manager roles, but I think what we need to do as journalists is emphasize for investors, and even for our audience, how important those roles are. And maybe what it requires is us to rethink and redesign how the newsroom operates. The readings this week present some contrarian views to what we've already looked at, and that's why I called it the future. These readings take a dim view, but examine, what do these things really mean? The first is a book by Nicholas Carr called The Shallows. Carr talks about the effects that the internet specifically is having on our brains. One of his main points is that the hyper-connected, hyper-searching nature of the internet is making it so we have a hard time focusing, and it's affecting our attention spans. The next reading is this one, Alone Together by Sherry Turkle. Turkle is a noted psychologist who studies the effects of technology on us. And in this book, she presents her views for what the future will look like, and also her ideas for how we should adapt to this future. I really like her point in the conclusion about instead of having a zero-sum outlook, instead of saying we're completely ruled by technology or we abandon all technology, she really pushes us to look for a middle ground. A ground that preserves the benefits of technology while also ensuring the benefits of close human personal contact. Next week we have no readings. There will be no discussion board. You will have your final thought paper due on Monday. But then the rest of the week is yours to finish up your wiki projects. For the wiki project, you can use an outside wiki like Wikia, or you can use the wiki that I've set up on our Blackboard site. It's really up to you. And I've also posted instructions on how to use the Blackboard site wiki if that's what you're interested in. All right, thanks for another good week. I'll check in next week with a short video to wrap things up. But if you have any questions, as always, send me an email. Thanks.